On this week's episode of the Steam Deck podcast, we're talking about the PlayStation 6. Well, more accurately, the rumors of a handheld PlayStation due to be launched alongside the PlayStation 6 in 2027. And what that might mean for the handheld takeover. What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 129 of the Steam Deck Podcast, Slipscreen Games' weekly gaming podcast all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today, as always, by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Max Wright.
Ahoy, ahoy.
Full steam ahead.
Full steam ahead.
So, Max, I'm excited for you to take me on a walk today, because earlier this week, we got some rumors about potentially another handheld competitor entering into the race here with PlayStation potentially getting back in the handheld console game. And we have a question to raise to the rest of the audience before we get into this one, which is, if you could take any console from any generation and make a dedicated handheld edition of it, what would it be and why? And I think this could also be a fun, like, if you have an answer historically, like, it would have been great to have a handheld version of this console at this time. I'm interested in that too.
I have an answer to this.
Okay.
We're talking like 2008, 2009 or whatever. The Wii is still going on. There was an image going around of a handheld GameCube. It was like a Game Boy Advance SP style clamshell. You opened it up, your disc goes in the bottom. It was all like, 3D modeled. It was like those classic, like, it's a PS6 and it's a circle with like ridiculous 3D model. But I remember being like, wow, I'd love to be able to play GameCube games on the go handheld like that. And here we are in the year 2025 doing just that.
I definitely think that's a solid answer, and my knee-jerk thought was probably Xbox 360 would have been the generation I think I would have wanted it the most. Just because I think that's like that whole like modular hard drive thing, like being able to take it out and just pop it into somebody else's device. I think if you had some kind of way to just like pop that into a handheld screen, like that would have been
your games go wherever you go. That's the dream, right? That's the dream we're living now, and it's a dream that PlayStation owners might be living soon too, if we are to believe these rumors that have been floating around.
And so of course, the dream that we as Steam Deck users are already enjoying.
of course. Yeah, the grass is always greener on our side of the fence. We know that one, Pete. So this week, or I think it was the tail end of last week, sometime between now and the last episode, there have been PS6 rumors circulating from as a leaker called Kepler _L2, who I think posts mostly on the NeoGAF forums. I think they were on Twitter very briefly, but they haven't done a lot on there in a little while. Kepler claims that the PS6's system on chip has been finalized and predicts that console is due in 2027, so only 2 years away for the PlayStation 6. Just some sort of technical stuff. It's confirmed to be AMD, like the hardware in all the current consoles, and will apparently take advantage of AMD's upcoming UDNA architecture. This year we just got RDNA 4. Next year or the year after, it's not going to be RDNA 5. It's going to be UDNA, and that's going to be in the console. So you'll probably see like a new version of PSSR. Things like that. But the reason we're talking about it on this show, not to sort of make everyone switch off, is that Sony are also reportedly working on a handheld console alongside it, as sort of a part of that PS6 family, that apparently won't launch until 2028, not 2027. I actually forgot to update that in the intro, which is why Pete said 2027.
Had me say the wrong thing. Oh my God. They're coming for me in the comments already, Max. Thanks.
Did it again. This could mean that in just sort of 3 years, we'll have a handheld console from Xbox, Nintendo, and PlayStation, which is wicked, alongside the Steam Deck and the Ally and all the other ones that currently exist. And that's really exciting.
What I think's most interesting about this rumor, like for our purposes, is how much this sounds more akin to what the Steam Deck is than what the Switch is, right? The idea of it not being the PlayStation 6 is a hybrid console, right? It's that you would have your PlayStation 5 and then you would have this companion device that is maybe slightly less powerful and can
Yes.
play everything in your library at, slightly reduced level. It's like that feels very influenced by the promise of the Steam Deck, right? And like the
Yes.
experience that you enjoy if you have you know, standard desktop rig and a Steam Deck as a companion.
Yeah, I think we think of these things as main console and sub console, right? The Switch is neither. The Portal, the PSV to the PSP have sort of done that in a way where you get like more pared down versions. The Portal not the same, but the Portal is an accessory. The Vita was like these are the PS4 games you like or PS3 games you like, just smaller. And this seems to be similar to that. The rumors here are that it's capable of running PS5 generation games, um, but that it wouldn't be able to surpass PS5 level performance. So it's not like we're getting like a here's the next generation console and this handheld is better than PS5. It's upkeeping with it. It seems like it's going to be a Vita, a PSP, where it is like it gets its own games, it does its own thing. Maybe just as a you know maybe you could update PS5 games to work on this, or sort of like downgrade them slightly.
I'm seeing a note that you pulled here that Kepler's like was making a comparison between like the PS6 portable mode being somewhere like akin to like the Xbox Series X or S, right, versus the X, where it's like
yeah,
it can basically turn in PS5 level performance of these PS6 games. I guess probably akin to what your experience would have been if you played something like God of War on PlayStation 4 rather than PlayStation 5.
yes,
Right?
yeah. Now that is interesting. We'll get into the Series S in a second. Let's run through some of the specs to give that some more context. So all of these specs are sort of rumors, obviously. These are the source for all of these is Kepler. So there's no way, apparently this person is trusted and has done leaks before. But yeah, so it's
Grain
AMD
of
powered
salt,
just
though,
like
right?
the PS. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just like the PS6 and the most of the PC handhelds we like, apart from whatever the MSI Claw that was on Intel, it's AMD hardware, powered by a 15-watt system on chip. So this is the bit that the sort of most recent. I think that it's a 15-watt system on chip, which is the same wattage that sort of the Steam Deck gets. So we're not going to be able to get like crazy high power draw to get like crazy high performance on it, which is probably why it's only capable of running sort of PS5 generation games, but not PS5 performance. That's not Pro, that's just PS5. So yeah, Kepler here pictures the PS6 portable, like you said, being somewhere between the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. And that's because Kepler has said that the system on chip has fewer than 40 compute units. I'm going to say CUs for short here. He says that it's a lot less than 40. Now, the PS5 GPU, the current gen, or sort of the base PS5, has 36 of these compute units, CUs. The Xbox Series X has only 20. So we're
Series S.
Series S. Sorry, Series S. So what a confusing name system.
It's
We
so
are
bad. It's so bad.
Yeah, really, really ridiculous. Like a friend of mine was like, "Oh, I've got an Xbox X," and I was like, "Oh, cool." And this is for the last year. I've assumed he's had a Series X. No, he means a One X.
Mm-hmm.
But how am I going to know that? Yeah, so you're sort of almost double the compute units. That doesn't necessarily mean double the power. I'm sure there are diminishing returns with these sorts of things. In the PS5 versus the Series S. So if this is sort of going to sit somewhere in the middle, it's still going to be fairly powerful. For context with other handhelds, the Steam Deck has 8 CUs. The ROG Ally has 12. So you can see
even
why
if it was 20, that would be quite a bit more powerful.
It would be, yeah. And I think a Series S powered handheld would be great. But this seems to be, I guess, somewhere in between that. For context, sort of the latest AMD GPUs have 56 and 64 respectively. This is the 9070 and the 9070 XT. So they're much more powerful, but they require a lot more power. You're drawing like 300 watts sort of through these things. So it seems like sort of the power wise, you're looking at somewhere in the middle. I'd imagine you've probably got DualSense style capabilities in the controls. It's probably going to have like PS Portal, like similar ergonomics, maybe not similar in size, because you're actually going to have to put things in it as opposed to just a screen and a little bit of streaming capabilities. But all of that sort of vaguely lines up with a report from last year YouTuber Moore's Law did a video about next gen PlayStation handheld that he was calling the PS Vita 2. He was saying that developers he speak to state that it is plausible that it could use 18 CUs to maintain native backwards compatibility with PS4 digital titles. And then for PS5 games, a pro-like patch could be applied after a bit of work. So I guess you could like almost downgrade these games to sort of PS5 games to work on this thing if
Yeah,
they
just
need
like
to then work on
optimizing
the
them
lower
to
power.
have better performance.
Yeah, yeah. So 18 is less than we've got there, than we've got sort of listed here. But that would sort of add up. He said that this Vita 2 is a PlayStation 6 family handheld, meant to launch many years from now with the next generation PS6 as a weaker but portable alternative for the Japanese market. Now, that's interesting because, as we know from the last couple of generations, I guess, Nintendo has taken over in Japan. Granted, they always have been very popular there, but the handheld systems are booming over there. People love them, and I think releasing a portable version of the PlayStation is a great way to recapture a market that I would say they have left behind somewhat. They really have sort of become more of a Western company, putting Herman Holst in the position that he's in as
Yeah, and
sort
they
of head of
moved their like
PlayStation
main office to
Studios.
Redmond, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it seems like this is a way of sort of maybe getting back into the Japanese market. And then the last thing that Moore's Law says here is that what I can 100% confirm is that there is a new PlayStation handheld in early development, and that AMD has already gotten the contract for PlayStation 6, but the exact specs and the details of this PS6 and Vita 2 are just speculation by him. So it seems like there is a new system, and there's sort of a bit of no one can really decide if it's going to be 18 like compute units or if it's going to be up above 20. But either way, it sounds like we are getting a handheld PlayStation maybe similar to the Vita or the PSP, maybe like just a pared down version of the PS6.
Yeah.
That's also then going to go alongside Switch 2 and this Xbox handheld that they've talked about. We don't know when that's coming out, likely next gen. So it seems like we're going to be in a new sort of space race where we are currently in the middle of PC handhelds. We've had the Zotac one, we've had the MSI one, we've had the ROG one, we've had the Lenovo one, all these sort of PC handhelds. And now we're going to be having PlayStation, Xbox, and Sony participating in a way that we've never really seen before, I don't think, because we've always had, Nintendo and Sony have always been run over by Nintendo every single time. So it'd be nice to see Sony being able to compete in this market and do some interesting things. And maybe even do what we want PlayStation to do, which is not release one blockbuster game every 5 years and actually do, in a franchise that is, and actually do AAA, smaller, mid games that allow you to sort of increase your number of games going out, the number of games that we get to play, while not taking away from these major, console selling blockbuster titles.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think like what you're kind of seeing here is two potentially conflicting visions for what this device actually is. It's like if it's a like Vita style device where it is essentially a kind of like it's its own console, but also it has crossover with some games, like that some of the like I could see like a title like Astrobot, for example, like could maybe run on both a PlayStation 6 and a handheld that is more akin in power to a PlayStation 5 that you just create like a viable optimized version for it. Okay, like I can entertain that idea. I think my reservation though is I feel like I don't know. I don't know that model makes as much sense when it comes to consoles, right? I think when you're talking about the Steam Deck and the fact that I don't have a guarantee that every game in my Steam library is going to play on my Steam Deck, right? And I have that expectation that it's like it's a companion, it's its own platform, it's its own thing. I think that works really well when you're talking about a marketplace that's as open as PC, right? Because there are literally millions and millions of Steam games, and there are, all these old games that will run on your Steam Deck, and there are all these fan games and emulators and just all these things you can do to fill up your time with it. Like you could totally have a active daily relationship with your Steam Deck and never buy a game on Steam, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if this thing, right, if this Vita 2, we'll call it, I guess, just to keep it differentiated in our minds, doesn't have parity with your PlayStation 6 library, and every PlayStation 6 game you buy doesn't, quote unquote, just work on it, then I think you run into this like muddying narrative of like, then what is this device, right? Like, am I buying a PlayStation handheld, or am I buying a thing that exists to be part of my PlayStation 6 ecosystem experience or whatever?
I think an easy way to split that up is to say, is it a PlayStation handheld? Sorry, like a PlayStation handheld, or is it a handheld PlayStation 6? Is it
Right, sure.
PlayStation 6 that you can take with you, or is it just another PlayStation handheld that you have to keep those two things separate? I think Microsoft are being very. I think they, because of their whole everything's an Xbox thing, that's very obviously it is a device that will play your Xbox games, and that's that. But I do think that, yeah, you're right. If this is as weak as it is, not weak, but if it's not as powerful as even the PS5 is, are you going to realistically ever expect PlayStation 5 develop PlayStation Studios develop games to work on this thing?
Right, and then you run into the question of like the same slow death that the Vita died. It's what happens with PlayStation VR 2. I think it's the same reason that Nintendo brought handheld and home console development under one banner and on one device, is that it's easier to support one device than it is to support two devices, period. So if this isn't a handheld PlayStation 6, if it is a PlayStation handheld and it needs to have its own library of games to support itself, I think that's a much less interesting value proposition. And not that there's no chance that it could succeed, not that I have zero interest in a device like that, but like we saw that the PSP and the PS Vita didn't quite connect, so like just doing another device that you then need to have a total suite of games for, or rely on the fact that you can play like last gen PS5 games on it. I just think I don't think that is as attractive a model when you're looking at the console space versus the PC space. That said, Phil Spencer always talks about how many people built up libraries on PlayStation during the PlayStation 4 era. Maybe that is enough for people, is like the Steam Deck novelty that we all enjoyed day and date, where it's like, oh, I can play this game on the go, and it doesn't, or the Switch was this way too, right? Where it's like, it doesn't always need to be the newest game. Like it was like, oh, Skyrim on the go, that's cool. Like that was novel in 2017. And maybe people will feel that way about, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon, whatever, Elden Ring,
I think that would be the case if it is that you. So the Switch, while there is like that, I can take Skyrim on the go. The issue there is that Skyrim then costs $50 again, and a lot of games now, every time there's like, hey, we're bringing this game to Switch. Do you remember this game? It's coming to Switch too. That's all well and good, but you're paying full price for it again. If you can, like you say, just take your PS4 library.
They're already in your library,
and they just work. That, I think, is a great, PC gamers picking up the Steam Deck, all of a sudden having all of their existing games they spent 10 years buying, they just work. Great. If you have to buy this thing and then you have to wait to be drip fed, or you have to wait for devs to go, hey, we're making a PS6 portable version of this, that I think is less of an interesting sell. And I think that we know from the PSVR 2 that is possible, that would happen, because you have to have the market share some of the biggest Switch ports happened a few years down the line for the Switch, because people were rightfully wary about whether the Switch would do well. When that sort of proved everyone wrong, all of a sudden you get people like Virtuos, or who did the Rocket League port? They were famous. Panic Button. You had Panic Button and Virtuos doing like PS3 era games, and like, oh, we're bringing this to Switch, and it was like, quick, there's a market there. We need to do that. And I'm pretty sure we have got PSVR games that are locked and not on PSVR 2, because the devs are like, well, there's no point. What's the point of us bringing it over? We haven't sold enough of them, and we're not going to sell enough copies to make that worth the effort.
Right. Yeah. And I guess like in the era we're in, where like there is an entire, by the time this thing would come out, you'd have 2 full console generations worth of PSN games that you could play on it. Maybe that's enough to have it exist in a similar niche to the Steam Deck, where it's like, yeah, it's not as
Mhm.
powerful as my PC, but it doesn't need to be. I'm playing Balatro on it, right? Like,
Mhm.
who cares, right?
And if you can wrap into that, um, cloud streaming like is on the portal, and also just being able to stream from your PlayStation, if you can wrap all that into this device as well, and say, oh yeah, so you could play this pared
That's
down version of a
interesting.
game, and let's say in 2 years' time there's a wider 5G network, or this thing has really good Wi-Fi in it, and maybe you could have, you know, similar to what I do, where or what I'm trying to do, where I'm able to take my home PC Steam library everywhere I go with me, wirelessly, or remotely. If you could promise that as like a, hey, not only can you play these games, you can also play the PS6 games you know and love over the internet, with remote play. I think that would be a good way to sell it, and also it would make it more of an obvious, or you'd have like another avenue for selling it. Let's say your portal, we're not making a portal now, we're making this device. If you want the what you liked about the portal, get this device, and then the benefits is you can play games too.
I think the because I'm with you. I think that makes sense. I think the I guess devil's advocate position I'd offer there is like, what's the price point on this thing too? Because
Mm.
if it doesn't offer parity with the PlayStation 6, it's like, are you going to be spending somewhere in the neighborhood of the equivalent of the cost of your console to not be able to play the newest games on it? Or
And we know that Sony aren't scared of that. PlayStation aren't scared of that because the
no.
PSVR 2 was
I
that
mean,
much.
dude, the PS5 Pro, right, is
Oh
$800. Like, yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
they'll sell a premium price. I mean, that's fine. But I guess like that, like say the PlayStation 6 costs $800. It's like, does this thing cost 900? Does it cost 800?
Yeah,
I don't.
that's
That
yeah.
gets crazy, right? And then I think with where we're at right now, I would assume higher price points than lower price points for
Hmm.
premium things like this. And if that's the case, it's like, if it isn't able to keep up with the PS6, I think that becomes a way harder value proposition.
Yeah, I had forgotten that this thing might not just be Switch price, 430 or whatever, like as a companion thing, because
I mean, if
that's
it's at all as powerful as a PlayStation 6, right? Like, if it can at all play those games, then it probably can't be at that price point, right? It probably has
mm,
to be $500, $600
yeah.
or more.
And I guess if your promise is play your library with you, maybe you're also not, if you're banking on new game sales, uh, and you need devs to make things for like to make games specifically for this, or to tailor their games to this, or update their games to work on this thing, like the PSVR 2, let's say, and you're trying to skim 30% off the top of all the console sales to even be able to make that a viable product for you. What we're trying to say here, is it worth making that product where it's, oh god, what am I trying to say? Is it worth selling the hardware at almost a loss or not making any profit, just to try and skim the money off the top of the games, like they do with consoles quite often?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, or do you need to go, right, we need to make profit on this just in case?
I
Because this
think
could be another situation.
the closer in parity they are, or like if you are in a zone where like the performance version of a game runs on the handheld, but like the bells and whistles version doesn't, right? The graphics
Hmm.
version would only run on the console proper. I think if you're in a universe where it's that simple and you can like kind of just like have like a more modular approach of like, yeah, like, you know, it's basically just like PC settings, right? Where it's like, oh, it's on ultra on the console, and on the handheld it's like medium or whatever. Then it's like,
Hmm.
okay, then at that point I think that is maybe not a concern. But if it's not that simple, then I think you're probably right, right? Because it becomes this thing of like, it's a higher investment to get a handheld version of the console working, or of the game working. And to me it seems akin to the conversation that's happened this generation about the Xbox Series S and the X, where it's like the S is not able to keep up with the X, so certain games take longer to launch because they need to work out, and I think that becomes a lift that like developers are not going to want to deal with.
Yeah, that's been the rhetoric for a lot of this generation, has been, oh, the Series S is holding things back. Oh, this game runs at 30 FPS on the Series S, and 60 FPS on the Series X. If we just drop the Series S, then this game could be, you could take advantage of the hard. You wouldn't have to make a
Yeah.
version that is weaker, and therefore the game could do more. Blah blah blah. I'm not a developer to know how much of that is true and how much of that is just people ignoring that PCs of various strengths exist, and you could have just turned it down anyway. I don't know, but if this thing is supposed to be just as, if not less weak than the PS5, and we're talking about PS6 companion here, is there not going to be a similar situation where Sony makes Spider-Man 3, let's say, probably will be out about that time anyway. They make Spider-Man 3 and you get the full wicked, this runs really well on PS6 version, but it's never going to be as wicked as it could be because you have to, let's say, you can't use storage as fast as the PS6 on your handheld version, so you have to not take advantage of that, and then the game suffers because otherwise you have things that are the game are designed around hardware things that the PS6 is capable of and this PS5 level handheld is not capable of. Are you holding back the game on PS6? That was a really long-winded way of saying that, but I got there in the end, I think. Do you think that could potentially happen, that PlayStation Studios games, which are the core, like, hey, bells and whistles, this is the PlayStation 5, and you see it, you play Spider-Man 2 and you go, yeah, I get it. This is so snappy and so speedy and there's no loading. If you, whatever the PS6 features might be, they might even be no loading. They might even be whatever it might be. If that's going to require power that the PS5 level handheld isn't capable of, I'm doing it again. I'm just saying the same thing again, but go on. You talk now.
I think I'm kind of two minds there because I think that yes, on some level, like that probably is the case, right? Like if you do have this weaker device that like everything needs to run on both of them, then yeah, like that is going to limit your ceiling a little bit on the other device. But I guess my question then kind of becomes like, we're talking about this device coming out in 2027, which I don't think is too soon, right? Like 8 years is like the standard life cycle of a console. But we constantly have the conversation of like, have we really seen everything that the PlayStation 5 can offer? Have we gotten the max return on what these consoles are capable of? Has any developer really been able to fully unlock the potential of these devices like we expect with late gen games in a console's life cycle, right? Like, the way that like Last of Us 2 looked on PlayStation 4 versus what early gen PlayStation 4 games look like. And I don't really think we have necessarily seen that yet. And I don't know that we're going to see it in the next couple years here. So the idea that like this next generation might not be the same level of like we've had a diminishing return in terms of like upgrades between console generations for the last several generations. It's just how it is, right? Like it used to be these giant leaps, and now it's more and more incremental.
Yeah, what we know as a generational leap is different now. The fact that it is just things like loading times, not necessarily graphics,
Yeah. So I think when you keep that in mind, it's like, I mean, maybe not, because maybe you are just at a point where like running a lower resolution version of the same game at a lower frame rate is like enough to create that like spectrum of experiences that is required to have a version that runs on Switch 2 and PlayStation and Xbox and all the range of PCs and handheld PCs and maybe mobile and maybe in the cloud, and like that, maybe that's just where we're going broadly, right? Is that like we'll get to a point where it is a little bit easier to be like, well, if you're down to play it at 30 FPS 720, then like, yeah, it can run on this device, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like
that's
Fortnite, right,
Switch
is a game that
thing,
runs
really.
on everything, and you could play it on a nice high-end rig and take advantage of ray tracing, and or you can play it on a mobile phone and it looks like a potato, but you can play. And I think that
it works. Yeah,
that might be something to consider when you're talking about how we maintain
sell, right?
parity across these devices.
We know Switch games sell, and we know. I mean, I'm in Steam Deck groups. So I pay attention to what people are playing on Steam Deck, and just this week, Oblivion Remaster came out, which we'll speak about later if we get time. That I've seen so many people that will do anything to make that play. They will lowest of low settings. They'll turn off whatever, disable everything they possibly can, and the game looks exactly like it did before. But they're playing And by before I mean the original Oblivion, not the remaster. But they're
Yeah.
playing. They'll do anything to play that game because they want to play it on their handheld device. And the Switch people will suffer through awful performance just to have that on handheld. And I wonder if the average gamer doesn't give a shit about performance like we do. I wonder if 30 FPS is just like, oh well, that's what it is. I don't care. The game runs great. That's fine with me.
I think for a lot of people it is good enough. And
Mhm.
I think that ends up becoming an interesting question when you talk about, I guess, like this all handheld future, these companion devices, because like we get comments on this show all the time when we talk about performance from people who are like more diehard like PC people who are like, the Steam Deck will never be worth playing anything on, it's too weak, it's, you know, whatever. Like obviously there's millions of us that don't feel that way, and that like having the form factor that you want, having the ability to play it on the go, playing it on a smaller screen, there's all these little things that for some of us edges out having the best, most performant version of the game.
Yes.
And I think, you know, I think about like how many like, you know, parents there are in our audience that own a Steam Deck or own a Switch or whatever, and they're like, well, that's the only place I can play anything because I share a TV with a family, or I have a partner at home or whatever, right? And it's like, yeah, I think for a lot of people, like the use case of playing it the way you want to play it is more important than any one particular benchmark or whatever, right?
Just being able to play it versus not being able to play it at all is it's like the best X is the one you've got kind of thing. That's X and Y, not X as in X partner. Like the best. I don't know. I was thinking I was in the shower the other day and I was like, oh, maybe I should get a new shower gel. And I was like, I've got shower gel. The best shower gel is the one you've got. Just as a
there's there's this band I really like called Cheek Face, and they have this song that's called Best Life, and the lyric in the chorus is, your best life is the life that you're living right now. It's like, yeah,
it's the only life.
Totally right, exactly, right. It's all it can be.
Yeah. And I think that for a lot of people that is good enough. So yeah, maybe the whole this is holding this back is not a thing, but also I guess the AI upscaling that's going on right now.
That's a huge question mark too.
All of that sort of stuff. Like, my worry is the fact that this is PS5 level. I wonder if it's not got the raw power or the actual hardware to run PSSR or a version of that or whatever. But if the PS6 is using UDNA, maybe this is an RDNA 3 APU, and maybe it uses FSR 3.1, or maybe it uses like a version of FSR 4 that has been ported to RDNA 3. God, I'm getting confused. Too many numbers and letters. Maybe this is like, oh, we can use RDNA. Oh my God, PSSR to upscale this game to 4K on the PS6. We can also use it to downscale or like upscale a much lower resolution image into 720p to run on the handheld. Maybe that is the plan for doing that. Maybe the question of is it holding it back isn't a question at all. But it's also not as easy as we know from the PS5 Pro. It's not as easy as you toggle it, you turn it on, and it works. That you have to have like, this is PS5 Pro certified because it uses PSSR and things like that. If you have to manually go in and do that, is it going to, is that something that devs are going to go back and do? Are you making a layer here or?
Yeah, I think it has to, on some level, have a little bit of that it just works to it. Otherwise, it's going to be, I think it's going to run the same narrative that the Vita and the VR2 and everything have, where it's, even if it's a nice device, if people aren't developing for it, if it doesn't have the same market share as Nintendo Switch, right, then like, is Sony going to support it? Is it going to like have a life cycle beyond? Because I don't, they're happy to charge a lot for a premium product. I don't think they're happy to have a niche product in the way that like handheld PCs like just have different metrics for success. So it's like, I think this is an interesting idea. I think I have a lot of reservations on whether or not it will actually come to pass, or whether or not it'll be successful when it does come to pass. But I think that like, it's the same thing we've talked about with the Xbox of it all, which is that I think having more people enter this space is good for people that are interested in this space. Like you being a Steam Deck owner, benefit from Sony putting out a high-powered handheld device, even if you don't buy it, right? Because I think comparing like that 18 CU number, if that ends up being true, right? To like the 12 of the ROG Ally. We talked about this during the post Switch 2 reveal episode that like, I do think that like having higher power, higher capacity units out from competitors is going to have Valve and the ROGs and the other handheld PC developers of the world looking across the fence, because I think like that they do probably want to be closer to the cutting edge and want to have the advantage of being like that. We talked about that a lot, right? That was one of the really cool selling points of the Steam Deck at launch, was that like it can play things that your Nintendo Switch just can't. And I think I don't know that we're like imminent on a Steam Deck successor. I still think that's a couple years away. But I think that if this is something that is maybe shooting for that 2027, 2028, like I think that could make a lot of sense, right? You're maybe like 2 years into the Nintendo Switch 2's life cycle. You have maybe an idea of what Xbox is doing. Maybe we have an idea of what PlayStation's doing. And we see this kind of next generation of handheld PCs come out at this like higher price point that like flirts with that, Xbox Series S, PlayStation 5 power level. And I mean, that would be very interesting, right? Like, I mean, like you said, it was what, 8 CUs for the Steam Deck, right?
8, yes.
So, I mean, double that is, that would be very interesting,
I remember thinking back, I think back and I remember, I hadn't been doing the show very long with you guys, but I'd had a Steam Deck for a little while at this point, and it was like, I think the ROG Ally had like just been announced, and we were like, hell yeah, here we go, space race, let's race to the top. And I feel like in those 2 years, we've not seen much change in the way of pure power. We've seen lots of devices, we've seen lots of unique things. The Legion Go controllers coming off, having a great kickstand. We've seen higher refresh rate displays. You've seen Zotac bring out stuff with like extra buttons on it and stuff like that. That's cool to see, but I think the internals haven't really had much of a change. And I think that's probably what we're waiting for in terms of the Steam Deck, is like a generational leap before Valve is like, yeah, this is worth us releasing a actual Steam Deck 2. We need there to be an actual. They've said it before. There needs to be, we're not going to nickel and dime gamers by doing the same.
Yeah, they want it to feel like a generational upgrade.
Exactly. And I wonder if having a partner like PlayStation on board to work with on making APUs that can do that. If we're actually, like you say, if we're going to benefit from that, as what is the Steam Deck 2 going to look like in 2 years' time, coming out alongside this thing? And are we actually going to end up waiting 2 years for it because we're still going to be using the same Ryzen chips that we use at the moment?
I think one of the other like major benefits you could see of this device, if it does come out and connect with people, is we talked about like how much optimization, right, will be one of the things that Nintendo Switch 2 will have in its favor because it's a more mass market device. I think that if a Steam Deck 2 or kind of the next generation of handheld PCs are targeting a similar benchmark to this potentially more mass market Xbox or PlayStation device that like may or may not end up existing, that could actually really benefit us, just because if the form factor that everybody's targeting, rather than like the Steam Deck, right, which is a couple 4 or 5 million units wherever we're at this point, versus like this potentially like big mass market Sony device, is like that could be a benchmark that Steam Deck can also take, or Steam Deck 2, right, could also benefit from, because it's like, oh, like, to take it back to the conversation we had earlier, there is this expectation that you're going to need to make a more reserved version of your game that runs on either Switch 2 or PlayStation 6, whatever, handheld, the Vita 2, whatever you want to call it, the Xbox handheld. And if that does become like an accepted thing and an accepted form factor, in the way that if you wanted your game to be on Series X, you made a Series S version, that could definitely benefit us Steam Deck players, because then maybe there is a easier time to have kind of a default version of the game that does target that, whether it's handheld console or handheld PC benchmarks. It's, if they're roughly the same, then, or if it's quite a bit stronger than those devices even, right? Like if, say, it is that 20 CU and then the Steam Deck 2 is like 30 or whatever, right? Then it's like, oh, you'll run circles around them, and every optimized handheld version of those games will run the best on your handheld PC, not your handheld console. But I mean, at that point, like, rising tide lifts all ships, right? We're all getting better handheld versions of games.
Yeah. I'm worried about power when we speak about these sorts of things. Like, even this device here, if it's going to be somewhere between the Series S with 20 compute units and then the PlayStation 5 with 36, let's say, and the Steam Deck has like a 2-hour battery life sometimes with 8. Or how long are we gonna be able to play these things for? What, is battery technology still moving as fast as it has done before? I know, storage
it doesn't
moves real
seem that
quick,
way. Like, I mean,
yeah.
when you consider the fact that like the Switch 2's battery life is worse than the original Switch, it's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe not as much as we'd like.
Yeah, that's like we'd love more powerful machines. We'd love to all benefit from more powerful machines, but are we going to have to have like battery packs in our pockets, or are we going to have to carry around 8 AAA or AA batteries like it's a Game Gear or something like that? You
just have a big backpack on your back that's just a high capacity battery. It's like an Anchor backpack.
What an idea! I remember I did a podcast in 2020 with Bob Wolf, and I think it was the guys from what was Fanatics 4, then became Redirect, where we spoke about what would, if we were to make the Homer of games consoles, it was going to be, like the Homer car, just
the
a
most
monstrous,
over-designed handheld.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm pretty sure we said it's a Switch with a backpack, and then the cable goes into the backpack, and that's where all the power and
it's the eGPU.
The juices. Yeah, it's the power, it's the battery, it's all that stuff, but you've just got the screen in your hand. I also think that would work personally, but hey, that's just me.
It's just a giant Raspberry Pi that you carry around, and then it, with a Bluetooth connection, it broadcasts the game to your screen.
Don't leave that Raspberry Pi cooling on a windowsill, though, because it will get stolen.
I love the idea of like a cartoon hobo like flying through the air towards a Raspberry Pi. Retro games. So yeah, I think either way, I'm very excited by kind of this like state of increased interest in handheld gaming, that like has been ushered in this last couple of years. Like, I think we all remember that period a couple of years ago where it was like the popular talking point was like that handheld gaming was dead because we have smartphones and nobody wants to buy a dedicated device anymore. And now it's like we literally have more we have more options than we ever have, and more like very high quality viable options that could be the only way that you play games, or one of the main ways that you interact every day with games.
What's really funny about that,
I like that, is
that even though we would say, oh, isn't that funny that they thought mobile was going to be the future, we just got out of Xbox, Microsoft going for a huge battle to buy Activision Blizzard, and the key thing they said they wanted for was the mobile games for King. And we are regularly seeing mobile versions of games come out. Like, mobile games still make so much money. I think financially, they were right. People are playing games. People are spending money on mobile games. But I think we, who don't care about the financials, we care about it as an art form. We care about it as a variety of games. We are seeing it very differently. But I think there is there's room for both, but I wonder if...
Yeah, totally. I think they're just different markets,
Yeah.
Like, they're different types of consumers in many cases, too. I honestly, I made this comparison as a joke years ago on a podcast I used to do, but I think it's a comparison that becomes more and more apt, that, like, I think mobile gaming is to traditional gaming as, and stick with me, as, like, pornography is to the film industry.
I'm listening.
It's like, yeah, like if you look at like pre-streaming, right, and like pre-internet media, right, like part of the reason that DVD became the de facto like disc-based content delivery system was because that was like what pornography chose, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things.
Is that true?
Yeah. That's a factoid for you. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, like in that pre-internet, pre-streaming era, right? Like there are hundreds of millions of people that buy pornography DVDs, right? And like that is an industry that can make tons of money, and that it involves a camera and shooting content and putting it on a disc and selling it to someone. But nobody would say that it's like that, though, way in which like making money worked in that industry should influence Hollywood and the film industry, right? Because at the end of the day, they're different products. They just come on the same disc, right? Or like they're presented in the same way, right? They might be like in the broadest sense possible. Like, you know, like when you're looking at like Kingdom, Animalia, Phylum, you know, all the way down to Species, right? Like there's a common ancestor farther enough back between mobile game and real video game, or film and pornography film, but they're not the same product, and they don't exist to serve the same audience. Their monetization model is not the same. The, you know, use case for it is not. It gets they aside from that ostensible visible similarity, they really could not be more different in the ways in which you buy, sell, and make money from them, right? Or the way that they get produced, whatever, the way that they're evaluated critically, commercially. And I think that comparison, while I think initially silly, has borne more fruit over time. That like, yeah, the mobile market is extremely healthy. It's not going anywhere. There are dozens and dozens of mobile games that you've never heard of that make billions of dollars a year, right? And they have had no significant bearing on the traditional video gamer market, right? The market of the folks, like you said, that play games as an art form, or that enjoy it as like a more deep hobby than this is a thing I do and pull out when I'm watching reality TV at the end of the day, or I'm in line at the doctor's office and I just want to kill a few minutes, right? Like that same person doesn't have the same mentality as somebody that logs on to play Call of Duty every day, or somebody that goes and plays the Elder Scrolls and then gets a tattoo on their body, right? Like we all have different relationships with video games, not just as a consumer, like, you know, as a product, but just like, you know, somebody that's sitting playing phone games for a couple hours a day probably wouldn't self-identify as a gamer, right? Even though they might play a video game every day, and they might spend money on video games every day. And that's great, but they're a different segment of the market, you know? And yeah, I think like as gamers have, like, that group has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, there's actually only more space for more niche things like handheld PC, right? Or even like all the Android like mini retro consoles that everybody's into
the
these
Ambinix
days.
of the world and things like that.
Like, that is maybe not for like the average person, but there are like dozens, thousands, millions of us that like they are for, and you can create a whole vibrant cottage industry by selling a niche product to a niche audience.
Yeah, I think we've seen that with like the Playdate or whatever, where it's, I don't think I can think of a system more niche than that, and yet there is an audience that is gasping for more games, you know. Are you done talking porn so I can turn my light back to purple from red?
Yes, yeah, you're good.
Cool, thank you. Just want to.
You don't have to put on the red light.
We should have an episode where we just sing songs. I would love to just. We'll do Flip Screen does Sting. Flip Sting games.
It would be so funny if it was we're only covering Sting songs.
Yeah.
Just Sting
Sending
and the Police.
Out an SOS. Sending out an SOS call.
I'm sending out an SOS to the world.
Love a handbrake. I love a handbrake so much. We've been too business today. Where's the pleasure? Well, you did just talk porn for 5 minutes.
Yeah, we just talked about pleasure for 10 minutes. Oh man. So yeah, you know, this is one of those ones where like obviously we don't quite know whether or not this, you know, stuff like this dies on the vine of R&D all the time, right? But it does seem interesting to me that like all of the major players seem to be deciding that they want to throw their hat in this ring again. And I think that does speak to like what an impact the like handheld revolution that Switch kicked off and then has been, you know, doubled down by the Steam Decks, the Anbernics, the Ioneos, the, you know, ROG Allies of the world.
People don't want to be tethered to their TVs anymore. They would like to have the option.
Yeah.
People want to game mobily. They just don't want to play mobile games. I think that is
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Totally.
They yearn for the handheld gaming.
And I get it. You know, it's a form factor I've always really appreciated, and one that I think I appreciate more and more as time goes on.
Yep. And much like porn, if you build it, they will come.
We're not going to beat that one. Thank you guys for joining us here in another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. Remember, if you want to let us know what you thought about this week's show, you want to let us know your thoughts on whether or not PlayStation's vision for a new handheld sounds viable as maybe like a console style approach to the Steam Deck model, or do you think that they're maybe just too late to this race and that by 2027 there just won't be space anymore? Let us know in the comments down below. I would love to hear folks' thoughts on this one. Of course, you can head over to flipscreen.games to drop us a line. You can also find our sister shows over there, the Nintendo Noise Podcast and the Flipscreen Games Podcast. You can find our Discord, all the ways that you can get involved and show your support. You can do them over there at flipscreen.games. And of course, I want to give a very special thank you to our Patreon producers for the month of April. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Stoby, Project Julian, Steve Stompy, Susan Still Likes Cats and also Boobies, Voodoo Vic, That One Kid Nick, Ty the Dude, and Waka Hula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Max. We'll see you next week.